Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we are coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Today's podcast title is Ancient Secret, Lord Shiva's Drum. Before we get into that, let's see a few announcements. Just a reminder that we now have an updates and reflections tab on the srisomeshwara.org website. It'll get more active as time goes by, but it wouldn't hurt to just go to the site and click on that just so you can find it. I'd like it to become, to have its a path beaten to its door, so to speak. What else? Still remodeling the kitchen. And here's the thing that I just personally want to talk about. Ever since November of 2002, I've been building Mount Soma. And of course, it's been a lot of work. The thing I usually refer to is how many loads of gravel, we have to have delivered, who are we going to get to build the road, or if a tree fell, need to get somebody to cut the tree and get it off the road, for example. And just of course all the bureaucratic stuff, the financial stuff, the legal stuff. And it's really not, I'm doing it because if I didn't do it, it wouldn't have happened. But it's not the thing that really that kind of work isn't, really the thing that floats my boat, And so what we're looking at doing, and, Pandit Prasad, our temple pundit, who's a dear friend, a wonderful man, is really emphatic that, this has to happen. And what this is that I really need to be with more with the knowledge and not so preoccupied with the business and day-to-day routines on that level. So we're looking into that. We're trying to restructure things. It'll be a process. Trying to hire some people and see what we can put together there. Because you see, at Mount Soma, we're going to build more temples. That's the plan. And that will happen in time. But right now, the three principal structures, and this is from a Vastu perspective, from a Sthapatya Vedic, cosmic architecture perspective, is there are three main fountainheads, if you will, through which pranam, through which the absolute, the unified field, however you want to say it, the coherence and intelligence and all that's inherent in the nature of that thing to well up through all the different levels of existence. And of course, number one of the three here at Mount Soma is the temple. And Pandit Prasad is doing Rudra there every day and all sorts of ceremonies. We have a Yagyashala, that's where fire ceremonies, if you will, are done. And then we have the Guru Shala. And right now I'm responsible for and living in the Guru Shala. Panditji and I were talking about it last night or yesterday, I think it was, or the day before actually. And he made the point, it's no coincidence that those three structures are in a straight line. I don't know, I thought it was interesting. But you see, the Guru Shala is in the southwest corner, just like in Vedic architecture for a home. The master of the house, the master bedroom, is in the southwest corner. And one of the reasons for that is because I'm pointing to the southwest. Any sort of negative energies or anything, they enter through the southwest. So the idea is that whoever's in the southwest corner protects the home or protects Mount Soma, what have you. And the Sthapati from South India came to visit Mount Soma, another wonderful man. And he was looking over everything, and he made an interesting comment. He said the backyard of the Gurushala needs to be beautiful, because there's something about if the value of that is really landscaped beautifully and stuff, it helps to maintain the purity of the entire development. So I'm being diligent about that, and I need to get back to the original point. I need to get more focused on, the knowledge, the mantras, chanting, Vedic recitation, all those sorts of things, as far as what takes place at the Gurushala. There's an interesting story. They say that in ancient times, there's a king, and he so loved the pundits and what they were doing. And so as gifts, he started giving them land. And by virtue of that, they ended up having to spend all their time taking care of the land. And the practices, the Gyan Shakti, the knowledge, wasn't enlivened to the degree that they should have done that. And so the whole thing didn't do so well. So we're trying to remedy that. And again, Pandit Prasad is really emphatic that that's my job. That's my real job. And the rest is, in that regard, you call it a distraction. But I don't regret doing it, because if I didn't, it wouldn't have gotten done, So we're moving in that direction. And it'll be good for Mount Soma. Because those of you who've listened to the podcast know that what we're doing here, and it's all Vedic technology. I mean, there's a science to it. It's not just make-believe or just well-intended thinking. It's actually real. And that is that by building an enlightened city, which is what we're building here, it starts to map onto the rest of the world. So as the enlightened city does, so the rest of the world does. So if we really care for the enlightened city, it'll have an influence on the whole environment, particularly according to Vishwakarma, Mamuni Mahan, actually, that one enlightened city is enough for each continent. And so we're building this one, and I'd love to think that in time we'll roll it out. The first one's, according to the Brigu Nadi, the first one is the most challenging. And so as soon as Mount Soma is completed, we'll build another one, and then another, and then another. And there's a principle, and I've talked about it, that positive attracts negative. And so there's a lot about how to work with that, and I've learned a lot over the past 20 years about that whole dynamic, Scotty. But that principle ties so beautifully into what we've talked about in the past several podcasts. We talked some about the Brahma Sutras, a couple of podcasts on that. Then we started talking about the fundamental structure of the Veda, from Ad to Ma, Atma, and how then the Atma, the self, yourself, myself, the self that dwells within every individual, is that which births the whole universe. So you might say, well, which self is it? We can get into that another time. I don't want to get too distracted. But the point is that it all comes out of the Atma, okay? And so we looked at the structure of the Atma somewhat, and all that takes place within the unmanifest. But then it maps onto the manifest. And it's reflected or indicated by the embodied, you could even say, by the letters in the Sanskrit alphabet. So the swaras, they're called, those letters, there are 8 of them that are structured within the absolute, are all vowels. And why? Because they're unbounded. There's no, even when you say there's no hard edge to it. There's nothing you can grab onto. But in the manifest, they're consonants, like, for example, ka. And but if you think about it, even the consonants have their root is an open throat, ka. And so, so this isn't just something somebody did because, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. This is actually the way nature is structured. And all the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, all those sounds, if you will, are rooted within that self-interacting dynamic, which starts with and goes to ma, atma. It's all contained within there. And it's a fascinating field. I want to talk a lot more about it. It's all there. The whole Veda, all of existence, the seed of everything, the root of everything can be traced back to that. And I know that sometimes it's easy when you first hear this or whatever, that it just sounds kind of heady, kind of intellectual. And so people kind of, we can even get impatient with it. We can get, it's just too intellectual. Let's get down to the nitty gritty of life, But what happens is, as we explore it, and we will, maybe some today, but certainly in the future as well, we'll probably get to some of the details today. But I wanted to do it in a way where it applies more and more directly to your personal experience, to life's personal experience. And as we do that, even if we do it in the regard of talking like for Brahmachaitanya, how the mind works in this state of enlightenment, what that does is, even for a person who's not living that level of consciousness, the roots of that dwell within the individual. And so by exploring it and trying to do it in a way where it can be related to, it helps enliven it in the individual. So boy, everything we just talked about there, Scotty, is pretty much what we do in a nutshell, huh?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about relationships and how to relate, how we relate to other people. A gardener, just to use an analogy, a gardener, he nurtures the sprout, right? And he's very attentive to the sprout, and he supports the sprout. And he sees the greatness, the potential of the sprout, And when you think about it, you could, using that analogy to people, we all have that blossoming. We're all moving, we're all evolving, we're all gravitating in the direction of that state of enlightenment. Return to oneness. The seed grows into a mighty tree, and then the trees drop more seeds, it returns to the oneness. It's a process. Every drop of water that falls on a mountaintop finds its way back to the ocean. It's just gravity in a cosmic sense. Everything's gravitating back to oneness, back to Atma. But when we relate to other people, sometimes we see that in them. We see that in the eyes of our children. We see the divinity there, and it's so spontaneous, isn't it? So natural to nurture that and be so very attentive to that. And we see it in our friends, in our relationships, our spouse. But what happens there is that we live in Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, the age of ignorance. What's ignorance mean? To ignore. What are we ignoring? We're ignoring the unbounded component, the component, the divinity within the individuals, within life. And we tend to focus on the surface, the material, the ka, the consonant sound, which has a hard edge to it. And so in our relationships, then, we tend to kind of crush the sprout. We don't support another person's always, and oftentimes we, the way we talk, we sort of refute what they're saying or find the flaw in what they're saying, as opposed to nurturing and helping them develop their insights and wisdom and knowledge that dwells within them in a constructive way. There was a teacher once that I knew, and I just remember that people would put up their hand and say something, no matter what they said, he would respond to them in a way that was respectful and nurturing to their being. And I remember sometimes they'd say something and you could just tell by the look in his eye or whatever that, they were off, what they were saying wasn't really quite right. But he always found a way to, and he used the word a lot, beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful. And then he would add and help unfold the grandeur of their being, just like a gardener would nurture a sprout. In our relationships with other people, we tend not to do that. And what that does is it compromises the relationship. It creates a dynamic of judgment. And on an international level, that's the stuff that wars are made out of, really. And so when we talk about the structure of Atma, all the vowel sounds contained within the absolute before it even manifests, what we're doing is we're exploring that root. We're re-enlivening our connection with that. And the more we enliven that connection with that, the more we spontaneously come from that place. And we become really great healers walking the earth, And so that's the spirit in which we cultivate healthy relationships. Because, there's the notion of familiarity, with our loved ones, with the people in our home, we become familiar. And when we become familiar, we kind of just relax a little bit and get a little loose in our speech sometimes. And unknowingly, then we can become a little harsh or compromising that tender sprout, because as human beings, we're all incredibly tender. We're all incredibly vulnerable. Somebody who comes across as tough and rough and strong, that's just a mask. That's just something they're using. It's just an underscoring of how much they have to go out of their way to protect the tenderness that's in there, So it's mostly really, it's structured in consciousness. It's a function of how you work, where you're coming from. But nevertheless, it's good to keep a finger on the pulse, on the touchstone of this understanding. And that will help you to heal your relationships, and it will help you to cultivate in the long run better relationships and a better relationship with yourself, the Atma, you see. Now, in relationships, particularly in close relationships in a family dynamic, you will say things, sadly, that, were a little too rough or a little too crude, or you were in a bad mood or whatever, and you're just trying to let your hair down and relax at the end of the day. And so it just becomes kind of hard for you to keep your finger on that pulse. And we all do that. We all do that. Even in the state of enlightenment, that's done. You might say, well, wait a minute, I thought enlightened people were, divine and everything. That's why the analogy is good to keep in mind, that even an enlightened person, that's the difference between an enlightened person and an incarnation of God. An enlightened person is still living in a human physiology. They're still living in a house of mud. Whereas a true incarnation of divinity isn't. They're living in a house of crystal and glass. And so on a personality level, we're wading through that house of mud. And that house of mud, one of the components that it's made out of is called chit. chitta. It's the storehouse of impressions in the mind, and sometimes referred to as the subconscious. And so much of how we feel, how we react, especially when we're tired, it's not who we really are. It's not really what we really even think, but it's the chitta that's speaking through us. So there's all sorts of influences then on the divinity within us as it emerges out into relativity. There's a Vedic principle called vritti, Vritti, I think it is. And vritti is kind of like the formation of our thoughts, the thing that forms our thoughts. And there are, I think, in 5 major categories, there are 5 kinds of vrittis. You could look them up if you want, though I personally wouldn't bother. But the important point of it is that there only one of those vrittis is any good. I need to overstate it. And that's the vritti that comes, it's the modulation of thoughts that comes right out of the purity of your own being. And the rest is largely just chit. It's chitta. It's storehouse of impressions that create a distortion that birth distorted vrittis. Okay. Does that make any sense, Scott?
Yeah, it is. Is the chit primarily responsible for how we project ourselves to others and in the
well,
world?
think about it. You bet. A good question. We are functioning largely from our chit. And when we fall in love with somebody, what are we doing right there? We're seeing that place inside of them that dwells beyond the chit, that's untainted by the chit. But everybody else, generally speaking, especially if we're watching the news and reports about this person or that person, largely it's about their behavior that's coming out of the chit, that's formed by their subconscious mind. They don't even know that. They think it's their conscious mind, but it's the vritti from the chit that's birthing the conscious mind. Is that responsive, Scotty?
Yeah. The way I'm picturing it now, it's almost like, you know how they've always given us pictures of how the eye works. There's a part on the back of the eye, and then there's like a focal point or something where the beam goes, and it's like there's a separation from that vritti of coming from pure consciousness, hitting that chit, and those beams have gotten split away from that source kind of thing.
Yeah, good analogy. That works. And see, we can all create our own analogies, and they help us to get some insight into it. In fact, here in a minute, I'm going to talk about we could even do it right now. Lord Shiva's drum, called Damanu. His drum, and the way his drum is shaped, it is a big circle at the top, and it comes to a point, and then it comes out again to another big circle at the bottom, and that is kind of like I talked about Lord Krishna's flute in the last podcast. This is to say it in kind of I don't know if this analogy helps or not, but just a different slice through the pie of the transcendental existence. All the gods dwell within that field between A and Ka. And so Lord Shiva's drum, Lord Shiva, Krishna, all the different gods dwell within that arena. And they each have their own story, but all their stories connect to the totality. It's within the totality. And so from the dynamic of Lord Shiva, it's his drum, Lord Krishna, it's his flute, and both are simultaneously valid. I mean, it's not that one's right and the other's wrong, but there's an interesting structure that emerges from Lord Shiva's drum. And that is that you can look at it like that self-interacting dynamic within pure consciousness, within the absolute, it starts with which is unbounded, fully expanded, and it goes through these, permutations of the different vowel sounds. And I talked about that before. I could talk about it for days, really, but it ultimately ends up in ma, which is ma, same thing. It ends up in ma, which is a point value, the seed of your own self, the Atma. Okay. The deepest level of your own being is that point value. But let's take a look at that point value. That point value is the absolute, going from the unboundedness of all the way to the point value of ma. And then coming out of that point, what is it doing? It's manifesting into relativity. And so there's a mapping, there's a correlation there. So what's going on within the absolute, you can find you could call it an echo or a reflection or a projection or some such thing. All the principles within the absolute, in fact, emerge into the relative. And so there's an interesting thing about that point value, and it'll come up more if we go more deeply into the Veda, but it's a good principle to hear. And to do that, I'm going to do a simple analogy. Just take a second and just imagine a line. You can draw it on a piece of paper. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, you can just imagine a line. And imagine you're traversing from one end of that line to the other end of the lines, from point A to point B, and you're traveling along that line. Now, what we're going to do is imagine at some point in that line, imagine a tangent, right? A tangent is a straight line that touches that curved line at one point. So you might ask yourself, if you isolate a point, does it have any direction? Well, not really. It's just a point. It's a point in space. There's no up, down, left, right, anything. But nevertheless, there's momentum, and that's called memory. It's smrti. Everything's made out of smrti. It's all memory. Even within the absolute, all these different vowel sounds, all these different components are all interconnected, and there's a memory of all of it and all of them, all the different points, all the different vowels within each vowel, with each point. And so like that, there's memory. And so if that line is now an emergence that's coming out of the absolute, and at that point is going into the relative, that point now, even though it's just a point, has a momentum to it as it comes out of the absolute. And that momentum is the result of memories, the result of smrti. So everything's built out of smrti. Smrti exists within the absolute, and it is responsible for what emerges out of the absolute into the relative. But it comes through a point, and that point it's a very interesting phenomenon, really. And it comes up not just in the manifestation of existence, but if we ever do go more deeply into the structure of the Veda and the mandalas and the padas, and I mean, it's incredible, really. But if we do that or not, the idea is that it's going through that point, and that point, like with Lord Krishna's flute, we talked about when you have a vibration, there's a point where it's neither here nor there, it's in between. And that point that we're talking about at the junction between the relative and the absolute, the Atma point, you could say, it has some qualities to it. One, it has the quality of convergence, to the point value from within the absolute. Then it has the component of the divergence from the point value into the relative. But what gets really interesting is what's going on within that point. Well, from the converging side, it has that knowledge. From the diverging side, it's disconnected from that knowledge. And right where they meet there's a contradiction there. Is it manifest or is it unmanifest? Which is it? And so it's both, or you could say it's neither, or you could say that where they meet, it creates, they cancel each other. And it creates a place of no thingness, no nothingness. And that's the transcendent. So from every impulse, if it's between syllables in the Veda, or if it's within the structure of existence itself, it's all waves. It's all from manifest to unmanifest, and it's all Lord Shiva's drum, that point value being that point. From the unbounded to the field of relativity. Is that making sense, Scotty?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's. I think it's really beautiful, and it gets more and more important. That notion, the deeper you go into the nature of existence, and also the nature of the Veda, and also its physics. Everything is a wave. The sun rises, the sun sets. An electron doesn't go like that. It has a fluctuation to it. Manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest. And so that emergence is rooted in from to ma. And so I talked about how there's which is the first syllable, but then there's also which is inherent in the nature of It doesn't have an edge, it flows. And so that takes it to the next vowel sound, which is E. And so E, now we're starting to create a field. And instead of it just being one no thing, pure unboundedness, it now has inherent in its own nature, contains all still within the absolute and unmanifest, but it has the quality of, you could almost say like it's digitalized, or it has, that then is a diversity. Keep in mind all this maps onto relativity. That's why it's so important, because that continuum of point values in mathematics, they call that a field. It's field theory. It's the field upon which everything is built. A simple field, for example, is a simple example of a field is just whole numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's say all positive integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so in that field, 1 minus 8 doesn't exist. -7, there's no such thing. It doesn't exist within that field. So what we're talking about within the field created just by the one sound of is a field that contains within it the entire arena of possibilities as they map onto relative existence. It's a field of all possibilities. But now it gets really interesting, because the next syllable is oo. Oo. Oo, think about it. If you look at the field, what have you lost sight of there? Well, you've lost sight of the wholeness. It's no longer it's making sense, Scotty?
Yeah.
So there's something called Chundas. So we've done Rishi. We've touched on Devata, which is contained within the E, and then now we're going into Chundas, knower, known, process of knowing. You see, knower, process of knowing to know. Ooh, how do we see? Okay, we'll do the pillow again. How do we see the pillow? Well, we see the pillow because we've hidden through Chundas, through Oo. It's all about hiding. Chundas hides. It hides all the different values except for that which appears to be a pillow. It's sort of like it erases, or it shields, it hides. Now the connection is still there, all consonants end in unboundedness, your relationship with all things, be it people, be it a pillow, what have you, it has its connection to the absolute. But it's in the Vedic principle, they talk about choice. So what do you choose to see? And if your mind is conditioned to function a certain way, you see the pillow, and that's it. You don't see its connection to the absolute. Oh, you can tell yourself you do, or you can make a mood of it. Oh, isn't it beautiful? We're all one. That's different from actually perceiving it. That's a state of consciousness, you see. So now what we've done, we've got A, E, and U. But now what about the whole dynamic? There's a whole huge, unbounded, gigantic dynamic within the absolute, and that's contained in the next syllable, it. It kind of like takes A, E, and U and makes a wholeness out of them. So now you're looking at the interconnectedness of all of that. And the next syllable, the is now an interesting thing has happened. We're still within the absolute, but all this thing is, for lack of a better word, heated up so much. It's become such an intriguing dynamic with the, that it's almost like it's heated up. And so there, within there, we have the seed for manifestation, which leads to the next vowel sound, which is A. A is the union of and E. It's the wholeness, and it's the bits and pieces, all in a series taken together. But what does the A do to all the us? It harmonizes them. They are all held together. So the Riv value is what's called, which maps onto is things going to manifestation in the Rig Veda. That's what Rig Veda is. That's where Rig Veda comes from. Rig Veda is like the foundational Veda, if you will. But now when we take I and E and unify them, now we have the value of that flow that's contained within Rig Veda, contained within the Riv, but that unification makes it flow. E has a flow to it, and it really emerges as the seed that emerges into relativity is Samaveda. And if you've ever listened to Samaveda, that's it. It's like WD-40 of the universe. It's a super lubricant, flows Soma in a most sweet and exhilarating stream for Indra to drink, And so now we've got Samaveda and what that's about. But then it goes to O. That's the next syllable. And that's a very interesting thing because that takes the A, and the and U, and unifies them. So now we've got the masking, the hiding component unified with the totality component in that sense. And so what it's done there then is by mask, bits and pieces, it kind of takes the totality value and chops it up into pieces. And that's called Yajur Veda. So now what we've got is a mechanic. Now we're seeing a mechanic within that absolute structure. That's why most pundits, and if you go to a Vedic temple and have a ceremony done, it's more than likely it's a Yajur Veda pundit, because what? He's a cosmic mechanic, if we can say it that way. And so he's the technician that brings that value, which is within the absolute, but mapped onto the relative. And he works with that through the vehicle of U, which chops it up into bits and pieces. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
Really cool.
Yeah. And then the last Veda is called Atharva Veda. It's kind of like the emergence, Tarva. It's the impetus, the engine behind the that propels it into manifestation. Because we've got all these components now, and the whole thing is there. The whole structure, they're still within the absolute, unmanifest. But it's through Tarva Ved then that we see, we could even say that point, that junction point, the abava, you could say. And there then we see the momentum of memory, because the whole thing's built out of memory, consciousness. It's the field of consciousness. This whole thing is about consciousness. The whole structure within the absolute is the structure of consciousness. And there's memory inherent in consciousness. And so it has a momentum that goes through that curve. You know, we talked about that tangent. It has a momentum and then goes and converges Lord Shiva's drum and then manifests out the other side into relativity. And that's where the consonants are born. And that's where the words, you see, the Veda isn't really the words. The words are an expression of the Veda, which dwells eternally in the unmanifest. And all those principles, all those values there, that's where the gods dwell. You know, they exist within the absolute. But through the Yajur Veda, the different Vedas, through Sama Veda, all that, you can then interface and work with those values which dwell in the absolute, all through Smriti, because that Smriti continues as you go into relativity, and it goes back the other way. Getting enlightened, here we are lost in the relative over here, but getting enlightened is about remembering. And what's Smriti? It's memory. So we're remembering in our awareness, we're remembering the divinity that dwells within us, the Atma. Does that all make sense, Scotty?
Yeah, that's wild.
Was that good? I mean, I'm wondering if
Great.
I can't hardly remember where I've left everybody off from the previous podcast. But you see, now here's the thing that can all sound like theory, and it is cool, Scotty. You're right. I mean, I just think it's great. But here's the thing. We're all evolving in the direction of Brahma Chaitanya, the direction of when we look at that pillow, we have the choice. We can look at that pillow and we can see the unboundedness, the unbounded value that it is. We can see that that pillow is the junction point between relative and absolute. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. We can see that contained within that pillow is the totality. But all of this is the emergence of the totality. So that pillow is this room. That pillow is the totality of existence. And the same goes with our body. What is our body? Our body is built out of that manifestation. Sharir, it's called the I am, Aham Brahmasmi, I am the totality. Aham Veda, I am the Veda. I am the body. Aham Vishva, I am the universe. But at that level of Brahma Chaitanya, it's not just theory. It's not a cool concept that kind of maybe touches something inside and we say, wow, that's great. Aha, that's what aha comes from. Aha is a moment of transcending. We see something that's cool, we go, oh, wow, aha, I get it. But see, in Brahman consciousness, people think that you might get enlightened and everything is all hunky-dory, great, I'm enlightened now and everything's beautiful. But like I've said in the past, it's a confusing state when you look at that pillow and say, I am that pillow. That pillow is God. I see Agni in that pillow. That's one value, one aspect of divinity. I see Indra. Our pillow is Indra. That pillow is, commonly appears as your Ishtadevata, the aspect of your physiology of your being that most readily resonates to the Devata value, the personified value of the absolute, be it Shiva or be it Christ or be it, whatever works for you, There's more to say about that, but that's saying it simply. And so that's where we're at. And so that's why the Brahma Sutra is of such great value, because when somebody first enters that state, it's not everything's all hunky-dory. It's like, what in the world happened to me? Oh my God, am I going crazy, or am I that pillow, you know? And so the Brahma Sutras are there, and they really help a person. They really step them through their experiences. Little things that may seem insignificant become, in the Brahma Sutras, become huge for a person like that. Is everything born from that pillow, or is that pillow born from everything? Is the Atma a result of the pillow, or is the pillow the result of the? I mean, it goes both ways. It's also interconnected. Anyway, I think that's enough for today, huh, Scotty?
Yeah, that's a lot to chew on. Yeah.
What's that?
I said that's a lot to chew on.
Well, that's a lot to chew. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we'll stop right there. There's so much more we can do. Let me know if you're interested. I don't want to go so far into this, and we could go again for forever. But what we want is the foundation enough. You know, you can't read all the Vedas. You couldn't read all the Vedas in one lifetime. And if you could, there are even verses in the Veda that say, what good would it do you? What the real important is finding the seed of the Veda within your own being. And so what we're doing in these podcasts, I'm not trying to make Vedic intellectual scholars in the conventional sense of the word out of you, so much as let's find those seeds, let's find those roots, let's find those connections that touch that place inside where we already know everything in its most essential form. And then we function from that place of perfection, that place of infinite intelligence, infinite wisdom, infinite harmony. So that's what this is about. Okay, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.